We are finally back into growth mode after, the pause that we took during COVID. We've always had to, take space from other landlords. And today, DLF, Prestige, all of these guys are some of our biggest landlords and we have great relationships with them. In June of 2020, actually right in the middle of the pandemic, we got that $100 million in funding, which honestly was like a lifeline to the business. We were in a very, it's one of those near death scenario stages that a lot of, I think, other startups and all of that go through. It is the reason why, we are so profitable. We've been so focused on like our unit economics from sort of like day one. When these large companies came in and they saw, wow, my, employees are really actually liking this and, I don't have to worry about doing employee engagement because we were doing all these events for the building. We had like pop-up quizzes on Friday. We had, free pizzas like just randomly on a Wednesday, and the employees were like very happy. Today, a company's workforce doesn't operate in one style. That used to be the case before. It will be very different for SaaS companies, very different for, banking services company, and it's very different for a startup that is being founded in 2023 versus a startup that was even founded in 2019.
Hi, this is Siddharth Aluwalia. Welcome to our podcast. Today I have with me Karan Virwani, CEO of WeWork India. Karan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Sid.
So WeWork is a phenomena that started in the last 10 years. WeWork and the global co-working movement, right?
Yeah.
People opting out of offices with free desks and they can move in, move out. The flexibility of having, an office and that you can scale, downscale at your wish. And today, in the last 10 years, it's become a $16 billion global market. In India, it's almost about to touch $1 billion by revenues in this market. And it's been phenomenal how this market has grown, like how people have adopted, how enterprises have adopted. And I think Embassy Group started this with WeWork Global to bring WeWork in India in 2017, and you were one of the pioneers. Right. So let's dive into the story, right? How you got Adam convinced to start the WeWork in India.
Yeah, so actually, more than like the flexibility part of co-working, which is or flexible work, which is now what it's become, I think the fundamental shift that was happening was millennials or, the new generation of people coming into the workforce felt like they needed something more from their work environment than, just a row of desks or, those cubicles that used to kind of be there. If you entered some of the older offices where no one was able to speak to each other, people were very like bifurcated. And the new generation actually started to want more about what was in the office. And so a lot of the large companies like your Googles, Facebooks of the world, in those days, started coming out with these really cool offices. You heard about like slides and like offering, food and all of this other stuff in order to basically attract a lot of the good talent and the best talent to kind of be retained. And these were the Silicon Valley offices. I think that was a trend that we, saw, or at least WeWork saw early on, and was able to kind of create that into a model which allowed for a place that felt inspiring where you come into every day. You also have a community of other companies and people that, you can connect with. So your time at work isn't just about working. It's also has a social element to it. And the flexibility of it, which was, really smaller businesses or while building a business is unpredictable, and you could have multiple cycles in different industries as well, whereas real estate was the static type of product or asset class which had the only one way to consume it was long-term leases, and landlords used to control a big chunk of how those leases are kind of structured, and the tenant was kind of almost at the beck and call of the landlord. So when I was actually in college and in my last year of university, or even maybe before that, I've always been entrepreneurial in in the way that I have loved working for the money that I got for some reason, even though I've grown up in a pretty well-to-do background. But something about that always excited me. I was in a business family. I got to see my father build a business from a small scale business to like a really large business. So it was always ingrained in me to have a little bit of an entrepreneurial edge. And so in my last year of university, I'd already started working on my first business, which was a hospitality business. We have a bunch of restaurants around the city that continue to operate. And while I was doing that along with a partner of mine, that's when I really saw in India the hardships or like the difficulties of building a small business in India from an infrastructure standpoint. We had to, take few desks in my dad's existing office. There were no offices that you could get. I used to do meetings in coffee shops or like rented apartments where, these companies were working out of where we would get someone to design our logo and things like that. And then I did that for a few years, and I went to then work with my father in the real estate space with the Embassy Group. There I got exposed to us, doing these large business parks for companies like Google, Microsoft, IBM, really large multinational companies. And there's such a stark difference between the quality of real estate or the offices that these large companies were working in, and then in contrast where a lot of the Indian startup ecosystem was working. And this was around 2013, 2014. So Flipkart was had just raised like the $16 billion round, and you could feel the energy, at least in Bangalore, of so many startups, so many stories, and like this crazy entrepreneurial vibe. So that's when the idea to set up, small space within some of the larger developments that we have and aim it for smaller businesses came up. And me being maybe, kind of new into a very traditional business and like just a little bit of young energy, I wanted to try to do something which was very different from, whatever we had been doing in the company. And that's when I made a presentation to our management team about this type of business model. And it's also the same time I actually started to learn a lot about WeWork and what they were doing in the US. Through that journey, we ended up actually having to travel to New York for, some complete other work. And we went into a WeWork for the first time, actually like entered a WeWork to see what it was about. And that was like a life-changing moment. I got hit with this
free beer taps.
Yeah, it was like you walked in and it was something very out of the ordinary of what you would never expect office to be like. People were really happy. There was events going on. There was like a buzz of energy. There were so many different interesting companies. I was just reading like logo names through the different offices, and there was just so many different companies that were there. So, it all caught me by a bit of surprise. And we knew at that time it was me and my dad, who were there doing this walkthrough, and I didn't have to say anything. He didn't have to say anything. We kind of knew that this is going to transform, the way that office is done. And it was a lot of simple things that they were doing very differently, which a lot of people could have thought about, but no one packaged it and put it together that way. And that led to us, trying to convince them for a partnership. And what happened was that Global or WeWork, was busy plotting out the international expansion. So Europe had just begun. They were, looking at partners in China and were trying to expand in China. So India was nowhere on the priority list as of right now. It was a developing country. The prices were never going to be that high. There's always like this perception in the Western world that, doing business in India is so tough. You're never going to make money. China is such a much bigger market, etc. So because of that, we had to finally come to what ended up becoming the first ever franchise model for WeWork, where we said that we will take the plunge, we will, the money, we will grow the business under the WeWork brand name. And, you guys will see that India is a good market for this product. And so that's what we ended up doing. And that was 6 or 7 years ago. That's how it all started.
But your dad owned the Embassy Group,
yeah.
right? So you could have done it under the Embassy brand name.
Yeah.
Why then get a WeWork brand name?
I get asked this question like a lot, and especially now because of everything that's going on or has gone on with WeWork. But I think it holds good even to today that many developers, even in the country or everywhere else, have tried to do this business or replicate the business, and none of them have been successful. It's because I think it was easy for me to see that what WeWork had done is more than just building out space and renting it out. It was an entire DNA and cultural shift that needed to happen. So there was something about the way that design married with technology, married with the hospitality and service layer, that they had built, which I knew was very hard to replicate. It's like, saying that why can't you just operate Four Seasons brand under like a different brand and expect it to be Four Seasons? Not ever going to be Four Seasons, because Four Seasons has that DNA. The way that you hire people is different. The way that your design ethos is different, and that was a very similar thing with WeWork. And last thing, I think what I felt was going to be of huge value was the global network, that companies are going to want to be way more global. And my dream was to actually, that WeWork India should be able to allow Indian companies to become global by making like the part of infrastructure and like the convenience and the ease of building a business so easy that, becoming a global business was extremely easy just through WeWork. And we've had so many stories where companies have, found partners around the world. They've found vendors for their products around the world. They've moved cities even because WeWork was able to kind of provide them with an office there with easy, access to infrastructure or people or a network that could allow them to build their businesses globally, which earlier was not so easy, right? You would have had to go to Singapore, find a, like a small office for yourself, find a network of people you can trust. Whereas with WeWork, that community, the network was already there. So the trust was kind of already, the barrier of trust was built already even between the companies that are within our space. So that was that continues to be a vital part why we.
And you were able to borrow the DNA from WeWork Global to India?
Yeah, I think a lot of things, we did. One of the things was, as very particular, things that I saw with other brands was that just because it came to India, they used to automatically dilute the quality of the brand, even the way the store would look. All of that stuff just because, India's cheaper, and so you have this free flow to dilute it. We were very particular that, the product and the service level that you get here will be almost exactly, or better than if you travel to like the original WeWork in New York. We focused a lot on hiring based on culture, and WeWork is and continues to be a very mission-driven company. So we focused on making sure that we hired strictly for culture, especially in the early days. And we actually also spend a lot of money, sending people or having people train in other markets for, extensive periods of time before they even came and started working over here. So I think a lot of those things worked, and credit to WeWork also, they had brand guidelines and entire thing documented on how to do everything, and we were able to just kind of copy that.
Got it. So the first WeWork you built in 2017.
Yeah.
And how many seater, if you remember, it was?
2,200.
What time it took you to build the second and third?
The second and third was a few months after that. So we opened our first one in July of 2017, and by December we had already opened 3 in the country.
And can you share a journey of scale, like today how many you have, and in each year how many you built?
Yeah, so first year was 3 locations, and it was close to about 4,000 odd desks in that first year. The next year we grew to 15,000 desks, so it was a 5x almost expansion.
How many WeWorks?
That was around 8, I think.
Okay.
So 3 became whatever, it became 12, totally that we had. Then we grew by 35,000 desks, so 15 became 35,000 desks. That was another sort of 30 odd locations that we had at that point in time.
Okay.
And then from 35,000 desks, we grew to 65,000 desks in 1 year. So it was, pretty much doubling each year. And for our business, it's not like app users or, sign-ons and stuff like that. This is physical, brick and mortar. You have to go visit these buildings. You have to, do due diligence on the buildings. You have to make sure technical stuff is right. You have to negotiate the lease with the landlord. You have to design the building from start. You have to do procurement for everything, then build it out and then make sure it's built out right where people can actually sit in it and then sell enough that it makes sense. So it's a pretty big, process. Takes anywhere between like 7 to 9 months to, bring everything on. And we were doing 35 of those simultaneously with a very small and young team. So it was a lot.
And today, how many WeWorks you have?
We just opened our 44th, and, we actually had brought on a lot of capacity right before COVID. And so COVID, we had to pull back a little bit. And so we've had a little bit of a back and forth journey there. But today we have 44 locations, close to about a little over 70,000 odd desks in the country. And business is doing incredible.
And you have just, I think, in the last fiscal year, hit 1,400 crores of revenue with 185 crores of EBITDA.
Yeah, last calendar year, actually. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And you are expecting to continue the same growth this calendar year as well?
So we are finally back into growth mode after, the pause that we took during COVID. We have, as a business, hit what is called as operating leverage, operating efficiencies, which means that we are sufficiently covering all of our costs and also incremental costs that we might have for growth by a decent margin. Businesses upwards of 20% margins at this point in time. And we want to grow at a pace in which is fast enough for, decent amount of expansion, because we have still a lot to penetrate in the market, but isn't too much that it ever risks the business margins and us, keeping these healthy margins. So that's kind of a balance that we've now figured out. And we'll be adding, about 20,000 desks year over year, which for us is between 30 to 45%, growth.
And I assumed that, every building that WeWork operated in was owned by Embassy Group. Is that not the case?
No, that's not true. Actually, Embassy as a landlord would be maybe about 20% of our portfolio.
Right.
So another reason why, we wanted to set this business up independently, we never wanted to do it under the Embassy umbrella, was we knew we had to take space from multiple landlords. We knew we needed to grow pan-India. Embassy, was a very regional player in the south. We didn't have any, real estate in Gurgaon or Noida or, Bombay, even for that matter. So we've always had to, take space from other landlords. And today, DLF, Prestige, all of these guys are some of our biggest landlords, and we have great relationships with them, and we have multiple locations with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi everyone. Before we begin, I would like to share that this podcast is brought to you by Prime Venture Partners, an early stage VC fund led by Amit Somani, Shripati Acharya and Sanjay Swami. Prime is often the first institutional investor in category defining tech startups in fintech, SaaS, healthcare and education, such as MyGate, Quizzes, Planet Spark, Bolt and Clip. To know more about Prime, visit primevp.in.
If you could remember, right, what was the initial investment by you and your dad to make WeWork happen?
It was always, we've put in money as and when, the business needed it, and we were fortunate enough that the traditional business, was growing also and doing really well, that we could pump into this thing. So we've invested almost 150 million of our own money in this business. And that's been over the last sort of 4 or 5 years.
I think last year, 100 mil was the first external money that you took from WeWork Global.
In June of 2020, actually right in the middle of the pandemic, we got that $100 million in funding, which honestly was like a lifeline to the business. We were in a very, it's one of those near death scenario stages that a lot of, I think, other startups and all of that go through. But we've been hit with multiple external events that have, made our journey like eventful and, definitely different from what has happened globally. But it is a reason why, we are so profitable. We've been so focused on like our unit economics from sort of like day one. And it's also built this incredible team and like culture that has been through so many kind of challenges in a very short period of time that, really we don't feel that anything else can kind of come our way that will surprise us. In 2018, November of 2018, if you remember, like ILNFS crashed,
Yes.
which was the NBFC debt crisis of India, which impacted us heavily because we were just about to raise capital from an NBFC and we had got a term sheet in our hand like literally 2 weeks before that. It was enough money to allow us to do whatever we needed to for the next 3 to 5 years. We wouldn't have to worry. We could focus on growth.
That was debt, right?
It was going to be debt, but it was, structured in a way where it gave us time to basically grow the business without having to pay. And it was kind of back-ended, pay, like interest payment, and it would have given enough time to raise equity and all of that stuff. So had the term sheet, we were going in to sign. I walked into the bank's office and I saw papers and this, that. The boardroom was all over the place. We were like, something's definitely wrong here. This was just before the news of ILNFS crashing happened. And they had a very heavy exposure to ILNFS. So they had to retract everything. And then, from there, money went dry. And at the same time, we were in this massive expansion mode where we were deploying CapEx money. We needed money to pay vendors and all of that. And so that was a very tough time because I had given commitments to these vendors that we will, pay. We had members moving in. We had signed these leases and, credit to all of my vendors. I hope some of them are watching this. I still thank them for this period of time. But we had an exposure to the market of like nearly 400-500 crores.
Wow.
With no money in our bank at all. And just, our word and our promise that we will make good. So that was a very challenging time. So that happened. And literally 6 months later, WeWork Global, IPO thing happened, which was, didn't really impact us from a business standpoint, but from a fundraising standpoint, it impacted us a lot because this perception,
perception of the market changed, right?
Completely changed. And I don't think just for WeWork, it suddenly started this domino effect for all growth companies. Uber had just gone public few months prior. It didn't do well. Lyft also had happened.
SoftBank group got crashed during those.
Yeah. So, and it had a cascading effect across the entire market. So that happened. And so again, no money, but we managed to raise some, money from here, there. We were able to tide through. And then we started to raise money again. And finally, WeWork Global saw that our business was doing really well. We had already touched profitability. We were going to, be profitable. They really wanted, to have a bigger part of this because we were like one of the best performing regions and all of that. So we started discussions in December of 2019 before the pandemic hit, for this fundraise. And we had an agreement, with them. And literally while we were in the negotiations, all hell broke loose and global pandemic, no one's in the offices. That time I thought it was like, that time I was like, this is like we were really stretched across the board. Luckily, they were very good partners and we were able to get the money done. And as soon as we got the money, the first thing I did was pay our vendors because I knew that as tough as it is for us, it was very tough for them. They had laborers and, they had this huge outstanding with them. And just by doing that one deed, brought us so much goodwill, because in the middle of the pandemic, where none of the other projects people were paying, their laborers weren't even allowed on site, they weren't sure, laborers were migrating out of the cities and all of that also, and suddenly they got this big injection from us immediately. And because of that, I think till today they're so grateful. We have this huge trust built with them, and I've built also like a good rapport with each of these guys, and we
So you finally survived, and
we survived. And now we're in a very, very good place.
are there plans of taking the WeWork IPO in India?
I would love to. I think that it's business wise, and the way that we are able to grow, and just from the cash flows the business generates, the margins that it generates, and the amount of growth potential left in the market is immense. We would love to go down that journey, but again, I don't think that we've zeroed down on a path, or a timeline even. Right now, the business doesn't require much external capital. We just completed a little bit of a raise, and we are generating also positive cash. So external capital is really limited, but I do owe our existing shareholders some liquidity and some return on their capital. So we'll have to figure that.
Because when you started, you would have believed that almost 80% of your portfolio would have been startups.
Mm-hmm.
And today it's just the opposite, right? 70% is occupied by enterprise.
Yeah.
How did the strategy change in between, and what were your insights during this journey of the last 5-6 years?
I mean, it's interesting how the entire, I would say, the segment had changed. Originally the word co-working, or it was community working, which was really for freelancers, SMEs, and some sort of mid-sized companies or more new age companies. I think that's how it happened across the world. But when we opened in India, on day one, even though we had designed and built a lot of the space for these smaller companies, we actually started getting a lot of interest from, larger companies. I remember we did a deal, for both Microsoft and Amazon in Galaxy, which was unheard of, in the flex space at that point in time. And these were for these innovation teams, or it was an AWS outfit that Amazon was looking at. And for Microsoft, it was at that time, I think it was something working on 360 or Microsoft 360 or something like that. Some innovation team, basically. And what happened was a very interesting kind of social experiment to some extent, where these large companies started to see the thing was the employees were the same. Employee guy working in a small company and an employee in a large company as a person, it's pretty much the same. Yeah. He was between 22 to 35 years old, had very similar interests, like going out, was interested in what was happening in the world, and wanted what we spoke about earlier was much more from their office, wanted a nice environment that they could come to kind of every day. So when these large companies came in and they saw, wow, my employees are really actually liking this, and I don't have to worry about doing employee engagement, because we were doing all these events for the building. We had pop-up quizzes on Friday. We had, free pizzas, just randomly on a Wednesday, and the employees were very happy. So that kind of caught on, where we were able to then, show enterprises that, look, this is not only flexibility in contract term, but it's actually a tool and a place that is going to allow you to retain and attract the best talent. And talent is actually going to love coming to work every day versus currently in your office they don't. And it started becoming a fight with the employees who were allowed to work at WeWork, and then in the old office or the traditional office being why do they get to work out of a WeWork? So that somehow was a clear shift that happened. The other thing that we realized was happening was that a small startup wanted to become a large enterprise, and a large enterprise wanted to act like a small startup. And there was no other place apart from WeWork that you had that kind of happening, where just because of being in the company of these smaller companies, even employees started to have new ideas. They were able to connect with these startups that, were building potential use cases for their own companies. So, at that time when we had Amazon, I know they used some vendors from who were working out of a WeWork, or some people who were building some stuff for e-commerce. They were able to actually use some of those products in Amazon. So it became like a very interesting ecosystem of that. And I think you fast forward from there post COVID, where it became less about the community and the network, but then it became much more around flexibility and, offering your employees the ability to work from anywhere, or, companies realizing I don't need a central large office. I much rather have scattered, offices across the country, or, employees themselves saying that I don't want to come to the office every day. Just give me a place where I can go to work when I need to work, and the rest of the time I would like to work from home. That is now what we're seeing as the reason for mass adoption across the board. The other thing that happened, I think, was that India has always had very low supply of grade A commercial real estate, or what these large MNCs would end up taking, and the speed at which they can bring on real estate in their system, which means whatever we spoke about, which is our 7 to 9 month process, takes at least 18 to 24 months in a large multinational system, because it has to go through multiple approvals, it has to go to global, there's legal stuff involved. And the speed at which these companies are hiring or growing is outpacing, any speed that they could bring on supply. So our business model became, so useful to them, because it was ready to move in space. It was plug and play. It was, geographically well located in the best real estate. We had done all the upfront work when it comes to diligence and making sure that, these are buildings that are, up to standard. And again, these companies had experienced WeWork in some other part of the world. So it was also very easy for them to know exactly what the employees are going to get when, they walk into this office on day one. We know that it's a standard offering. We know there's a certain service level. And so what you're seeing now is that, we move from innovation teams, peripheral teams to, core teams that are now using our space, and core units that are, taking more permanent space with us. And we've also built a suite of products now that enable the workforce. So we've built a suite that, a product which is a day pass, WeWork on demand, which is for remote first workers, where you can come into an office just for the day, and only, we charge your company only based on what you used on that day. And then we also have, the wide end of the spectrum, complete end-to-end managed office for large companies spanning across thousands of employees, for multiple years. What we've seen is that today, a company's workforce doesn't operate in one style. That used to be the case before. They have teams that work remote. They have teams that are going to come in every single day in terms of operational teams. There are also teams that are kind of in between. And so they don't need static real estate anymore. And they don't need that. They actually need a product or a service that can enable whatever way of working they as a company are going to have. It will be very different for a SaaS company. It's very different for, banking services company. And it's very different for a startup that is being founded in 2023 versus a startup that was even founded in 2019. Very different mentalities and how people are even setting it up. So we want to be the one platform which enables all styles. And, you're able to do that through us.
And you see this trend growing among even the legacy enterprises like banking, the HULs of the world.
Yeah, I mean, we have Ketan and Company, which is a law firm. It's been around for hundreds of years. They have their primary office with us now. When people were worried about privacy and, how can I have a law firm in here because my client doesn't want someone to see that they're coming to meet me or whatever, whatever it is, to some, public sector banks also in Bombay have taken space with us. And they have very strict strict regulation. RBI has certain laws on how and where they can take space.
Yeah.
So we've been able to even overcome a lot of that. So we've done every single sector, every type of enterprise or any type of company basically.
And I think you created the market by being a premium offering. So WeWorks open seats start with 12,000 rupees today,
Yeah.
right? And then goes up to
Yeah.
like 25,000.
It depends on the location, but yeah, we start even as low as $8,000 in certain locations, and we go as high as 40,000, for a dedicated private office in some locations.
So now individual small co-working space have come up, I think in the 5,000-6,000 range, just to cater to the lower tier. So it's like creating. Do you think that strategy works when you create the premium segment of the market? The lower and the middle end automatically creates itself.
Look, I think that everyone has a different strategy. We have certain peers or competitors who are focused purely on the lower, price point and, going like a volume game versus sort of like a price game. The thing with us is that we are very customer experience or member experience, as we call it, is our topmost priority.
Yeah.
And we also are capturing the multinational, corporation or the top tier of Indian enterprise, Indian startups as our primary customer base. And for them, more than convenience cost and the cost saving, they're very focused on their own employee experience. And they actually, want to spend on that, today, because there's a talent war, they're looking at retaining. So we spend an X amount on our build out. You can really, see the difference between a WeWork space and a competitor space. Quality of our service is at a certain level, and you can see that through how many people stay with us. We have a net promoter score and all of that stuff that's pretty high. So for the amount we spend and for what we're offering, it only makes sense for us to, operate in this type of price range. If we were operating at a lower price range, either of two things would happen. We would be burning money, and we wouldn't have unit economics, or we would have to dilute the product and experience, for our members, which we don't want to do. I don't think it all depends on what type of brand and what type of, product you want to offer in the market.
And how big is the WeWork full-time team in India?
We're currently about 470 people.
I think initial years you were like 40, 50 people operating the full setup right across India.
Yeah, I think our first year we were only like 45 people. We had gone up, all the way even to like 550, but
trimmed down during the COVID period.
Yeah.
And during those 2 years of COVID, you saw almost like 10% occupancy or 5% occupancy?
It was like zero. First wave was like the worst, right? When everyone was in panic mode, and government rules and all of that also was, in panic mode. We saw occupancy, like what is sold, go from 77% at that point in time down to 47% in like a span of 30 days or like 45 days. And this was really because our value proposition was that if your business is not doing well, or like you have, if you need to scale back, you can. But it's generally because like industries have cycles and, different companies have cycles. So when you're in so many different industries as like a member base, it's okay, because today, let's say tech is kind of scaling back, but BFSI, and banking is expanding, almost doubling more than what tech is kind of scaling back in some sense. So you always have that balance. But like COVID, it was, everyone scaled back. People didn't know what to do. Do I have to pay the rent? Do I not have to pay the rent? Should I negotiate the rent? Everyone used it as an opportunity. So yeah, we were worried, but we took a very different approach, I think, than everyone else. We said that we are custodians to a lot of small businesses, in the sense that a lot of people are building their livelihood, their dreams in our space. So today, if we take like a draconian stance and say that, nothing doing, like pay me everything, I want it on this day, people would have to choose between us and maybe paying the employees, or, taking care of what was more important, which was their home or their health or whatever. So we decided we're going to take a very partner-led approach, where we said, listen, we're going to take a hit for you now, but we want some assurance or like, some more guarantee that you will stay with us longer than you were originally expecting, or that when things, are good, you continue to expand with us, or, stuff like that. And we also took a separate approach for large enterprises where we were operating, some of their data servers, data space in our space versus, a small company that was 4 or 5 person. We took an approach based on how badly they were impacted, and I think that again is one of those things that brought us a lot of goodwill in all of this time. As soon as lockdowns lifted, and even in the second wave, it was like much less of an impact. People didn't scale down because they were more sure we were taking care of them. Third wave, there was absolutely nothing. Like no one even flinched. We just continued to operate, and then also the quality of, I think, our members, it got better because the healthier companies actually are the ones who came back, the ones who were able to manage their, operations, came back and were able to grow and, continue to then finally start hiring and get back to normal.
So in a sense that you operate right now the physical infrastructure in, in the co-work space of India, you would know exactly, right, which are the sectors which are doing well, which are not doing well as of 2023. Can you put some more light on it?
I think we mimic, very much like what happens across the country in a micro way, like within our space. So India, generally about 60% of all, demand, commercial real estate comes from IT, which is, or ITS, which is, tech companies, tech services. And that, I think, continues to be the case even today. We have seen a scale down from a lot of companies that were, at this bolstering pace, especially from 2020 to 22. So we saw EdTech, suddenly take a lot of space with us. Then we saw they're the ones who like the first ones to shrink. We saw, and we continue to see e-commerce grow, and not just like the main guys, but there's been a lot of vendor ecosystem created around e-commerce now, which is also growing. People building SaaS tools for e-commerce for all across the supply, like that whole chain. AI now is like another massive thing that we're seeing. AI and climate focused companies, or a lot of companies focused on the ESG component and helping them kind of do that. So a lot of AI companies and a lot of these environmentally focused companies today. And on the enterprise side, like I said, banking and media have started to overtake IT and IT services, at least in this period of time. So we're seeing a lot of companies like multinational banks and stuff like that come into India, start to grow their footprint. What we've seen also is that the type of work that is coming to India has changed drastically, from back office, tele-services, telecalling, to now full-fledged R&D, product development sites happening here in itself. In media, like a lot of animation happens in India. All of your CGI, a lot of those effects that you see from some of these bigger movies, actually a lot of the work happens in India. So the work, or the type of work also is changing in terms of, what's happening here. It's definitely moving up the service sector.
And this data also helps you to grow, right? So your outbound team can target which are the sectors to go after.
Yeah. And, like it also marries well with what you see in the VC world. Yes. Right, because almost the first place that goes where you get money is to either hire people or, office space, or to hire people. Yeah. So we benefit a lot from that, and you see like a direct relation. Like whoever's getting funded is taking space and is hiring.
And what is the point that you think, right, that WeWork India could hit $1 billion in revenues?
Maybe like 3 years.
Wow, it's just required you to grow like double every year almost.
It doesn't require us to double every year, but we do have to sustain like a decent, sort of like pace of growth. We're already sort of like going to be close to about 300 odd million, in terms of run rate, like very soon. So yeah, I think within 3 years.
And right now, how much of the space, like commercial real estate space in India, is occupied by co-works?
Co-working right now is like between 6 to 8% of all of commercial real estate. So Indian, grade A supply is like 800 million square foot of all supply. Co-working right now is just about like 40 odd million. And that's only happened in the last 5 years. Just to put all of that in perspective, Manhattan has 800 million square foot of grade A supply.
Okay.
So Indian commercial real estate in itself has not reached, any type of saturation or come close to that large scale. And, this is like Bangalore is the highest amount of absorption in terms of real estate globally in the last like few years. You go to Outer Ring Road, you see all those companies, sitting over there. That belt itself is like 30% of the GDP of all of India coming from like that one road. Yeah, so there's still a lot of growth for the traditional side in itself. And, we feel that co-working of, the flex workspace industry will become at least 20% of, all commercial real estate in a period of time. Or even if you say like at least 20% of all companies' workforce will work in a flexible model. I mean, I think that's now post-COVID safe to say that, the very least 20%. Right now, we're talking about between 50 to 100% of a lot of workforce is going completely hybrid and flexible. But you translate that into like actual square footage, at least, we think at least 20%. So there's still like almost a tripling of where we are currently, yet to happen for that to happen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karan. It's been such a wonderful experience recording with you. And to know the real side of the commercial real estate market and how much co-working contributes, how much pace is co-working growing, and then what are the factors that are leading to it?
I think it's growing pretty fast right now. Almost 80% of all requirements coming in from companies are asking for flex as a working style, working option, which never existed. And, we as flex industry have become the third highest taker of space, which never used to exist. So it's IT, ITS, banking and, financial services. And then like flex that is taking a lot of the real estate.
Flex means the company will register 100 employees with you and it will take 50 seats. So any day, any of the 50 employees can come to and stay.
It could be in any of those different styles of working.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.